The calm before the storm. The dark expanse of space stretched out endlessly before the Vanguard, a ship that was little more than a speck compared to the vast fleet it would soon face. It was a small, outdated vessel with a worn-out hull and faded insignia, but it was humanity's last hope in the upcoming battle. The crew, exhausted and battle-worn from countless skirmishes, gathered in the ship's main control room, their faces a mix of uncertainty and determination. Commander Jackson Carter stood in front of them, his hands clasped behind his back. His sharp blue eyes scanned the room, meeting the gaze of each crew member. He was a man who had seen more than his fair share of battles, yet there was a calm in his demeanor that didn't match the danger looming on the horizon. Despite their wariness, the crew knew they could trust him, but even their trust couldn't stop the nervous whispers that had begun to spread among them. "How are we supposed to survive this?" whispered Lieutenant Rena, glancing nervously at the tactical map that glowed on the control panel. She knew better than anyone that the Vanguard was no match for the Galactic Empire's elite fleet. She wasn't alone. Crew members muttered to each other, their doubts growing. They'd all heard the stories of the Empire's fleet, the most advanced, most powerful warships in the galaxy, capable of erasing entire planets with a single strike. And now they were facing them. Alone, with only a single ship, the odds were impossible. The fear was palpable. Commander Carter, however, remained unfazed. His reputation as a brilliant strategist was known throughout the fleet, but this mission seemed beyond even him. The Vanguard was a relic of the past, a ship that had seen better days. Its weapons were outdated, its shields barely functional. They couldn't even match the smallest Empire vessel in terms of firepower. Yet Carter had insisted that this was a fight they could win. "Listen up, everyone." Carter's voice cut through the murmurs, steady and commanding. "We're not here to defeat them head-on. We're here to survive. And more than that, we're here to show the galaxy what humanity is capable of." The room went silent. Carter's words didn't offer much in terms of specifics, but they gave the crew something they hadn't had in days: hope. "We'll fight on our terms, not theirs. The Empire relies on brute force, but we have something they don't: our ingenuity. We're going to use the terrain to our advantage, hit them where they don't expect, and leave them wondering how they could have been so blind." He paused for a moment, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. "This isn't just a fight for survival. This is a fight for our future." Rena exchanged a glance with her fellow officers. They still had doubts, but something about Carter's conviction was infectious. Maybe it was because they had no other choice, or maybe it was because they had all seen him pull off the impossible before. But now, standing in the face of certain death, they were ready to follow him. As Carter moved to the helm, his hand brushing over the worn console, a strange calm settled over the crew. It was almost as if the ship itself had a sense of purpose now, a will to fight. The deep hum of the engines vibrated through the floor, steady and reliable. The tension in the control room remained, but the uncertainty was gone. They were moving forward. Suddenly, the soft chime of an incoming message interrupted the silence. A voice came through the comms, cold and distant. "Commander Carter, the Empire's fleet is approaching. Estimated time to engagement, 20 minutes. Everyone held their breath. 20 minutes. It was a short time to prepare, but the crew had little choice. They had trained for this, and now it was time to put that training into action. The map on the tactical display shifted. A group of Empire warships, sleek and menacing, appeared in the distance, their massive forms taking up the majority of the screen. Their weapons glowed faintly, their shields radiating with energy. They were coming, and there was no turning back now. "Steady," Carter said quietly, more to himself than to the crew. His fingers flew over the control panel, adjusting their course as they prepared to enter the asteroid field that lay ahead. It was a dangerous place, an obstacle course of massive rocks and debris, but it was also their only chance to catch the Empire off guard. "We'll use the asteroids as cover," Carter explained, his voice clear and confident. "We can't outrun them, but we can outsmart them." The crew nodded in agreement. They had no illusions about what would happen if they failed. But failure wasn't an option. Not now. As the ship slowly moved toward the asteroid field, the tension in the control room grew. The hum of the engines seemed louder now, the silence between the crew more profound. Every member of the team knew what was at stake. The fate of humanity, the future of their species, was in their hands. Reyna stood by the weapons console, her fingers tapping nervously on the controls. She had trained for this moment, but now that it was here, the gravity of the situation hit her hard. How could they possibly defeat a fleet that was so much stronger? How could they stand a chance? But then she remembered something Carter had said before the mission began. "We don't fight like they do. That's our strength." Her resolve hardened. She would fight with everything she had. They all would. With a final glance at the Empire's approaching fleet, Commander Carter turned to face his crew. "Ready yourselves. We got one shot at this. But I believe in each of you. We'll do this together." And with that, the Vanguard entered the asteroid field, the Empire's fleet close behind, unaware of the trap that was about to be set. Into the abyss. The hum of the Vanguard's engines was the only sound that filled the otherwise silent control room. Commander Carter stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the massive asteroid field ahead. The crew had never been this close to the edge of the Empire's territory, but they couldn't afford to hesitate. The Empire's fleet was still looming behind them, closing in fast. This was their only chance to survive. "Are we ready?" Carter's voice was steady, but there was a sharp edge to it that made the crew pause. "Yes, Commander," Reyna responded, her voice firm as she adjusted the targeting systems. Every officer on the bridge had a role to play, and they all knew that there would be no room for mistakes. With a deep breath, Carter gave the order. "Engage the asteroid field. Keep your eyes sharp." The Vanguard began to maneuver, sliding past enormous rocks and debris that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The ship's smaller size allowed it to weave between the asteroids, but the path ahead was perilous. One wrong move, and they'd be smashed to pieces. The crew couldn't afford to blink, let alone look away from their consoles. The fleet of Empire warships was still behind them, but they had not yet realized what was happening. Their sensors were still trying to lock onto the small human vessel, but the dense asteroid field was jamming their readings, giving the Vanguard a slim advantage. The Empire ships were too large to navigate through the maze of rocks and debris without slowing down, and Carter knew they had to take full advantage of it. Reyna looked over at Carter. "They'll be out of range soon, but so will we." Commander Carter nodded, his mind already working on the next step. "Not yet. We need them to get closer." The tension was thick in the air. Each officer was focused on their tasks, knowing that every second counted. Every minute they spent in the asteroid field was another moment of life, another moment closer to victory. Carter kept a watchful eye on the Empire fleet's movements, calculating when they would be close enough to strike. If they could just hold on a little longer. 5 minutes, Reyna announced. "They'll be in range." "Good," Carter said, his voice calm but his mind sharp. "We'll make our move then." The ship jostled slightly as it passed close to an enormous asteroid, its surface gleaming with the faint light of distant stars. Carter's eyes flicked to the rear screen, and for a moment, he caught sight of the Empire's fleet. A long line of ships, their designs sleek and deadly, cutting through space like a wolf pack on the hunt. They were getting closer. Reyna's fingers danced across the console, adjusting their position slightly. The asteroid field was becoming more dangerous, the rocks larger, more unpredictable. It was easy to lose track of a single piece of debris when so many were moving around them. But it was also their only cover. "We can't keep this up much longer," Lieutenant Yara said, her voice laced with urgency. "We have to make the next move count." "I know," Carter replied. His jaw tightened. "It will. Just a little longer." The countdown to engagement felt like an eternity. The Empire ships were closing in fast, their weapons locking onto the Vanguard. It wouldn't be long before they fired their first shot, and with their superior firepower, that one blast could tear the human ship apart. But Carter knew this. He prepared for it. "Now," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. Reyna quickly activated the weapons system, and a series of quick beeps echoed across the bridge. The Vanguard's old energy cannons hummed to life, their weak power just a fraction of what the Empire's ships could unleash. But they didn't need overwhelming firepower. They just needed to strike fast and leave no time for the Empire to react. The first blast shot from the Vanguard's cannons, slamming into an asteroid just in front of them. The debris from the explosion scattered, providing a brief moment of cover. Carter immediately turned the ship hard to the left, weaving between the fragments of the shattered rock. The Empire ships didn't have the agility to follow, and for the first time, they were caught off guard. The Empire fleet halted briefly, their ships unable to track the Vanguard in the chaos of the asteroid field. But the pause was brief. Their sensors quickly adapted, and soon their firepower was focused on the small human vessel. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Carter barked. The ship rocked as blasts from the Empire ships exploded near them. The shields held, but for how long? Every impact sent a shiver through the crew, a reminder of just how close they were to destruction. The Vanguard's shields were already taking damage, the energy levels draining faster than they could recover. But Carter wasn't worried. This wasn't the moment to panic. "Now," he shouted, slamming his hand on the console. "Launch the decoy." A small, fast-moving drone shot out from the Vanguard, designed to mimic their ship's signature. It sped off, trailing behind a few hundred meters. The Empire ships immediately locked onto it, thinking it was the real target. This was their chance. Carter's plan was working. The Empire's fleet had taken the bait, and now they were following the decoy. "Full speed ahead," Carter yelled, gripping the controls. The Vanguard shot out of the asteroid field and into open space, the decoy continuing to fly in the opposite direction. The Empire fleet was still following, their ships too large to make a sharp turn. The Vanguard had escaped, at least for now. But Carter knew that this was just the beginning. The battle had only just begun, and the real fight was about to begin. As the ship sped into the vast emptiness of space, the crew looked around in disbelief. They had done it. They had outsmarted the most powerful fleet in the galaxy. For the first time, they felt like they stood a chance. But the war was far from over, and the Vanguard was just one ship. Against the full might of the Empire, could they really win? The crew didn't know yet, but one thing was certain. They were alive, and for the first time, Reyna turned her seat around, her face filled with understanding. "You're talking about a targeted strike, aren't you? One that will cripple their command ship." Carter nodded. "Exactly. If we can take down their flagship, the rest of their fleet will be thrown into chaos. We'll use that confusion to make our escape." "But how will we even get close enough to the flagship?" Lieutenant Yara asked. "Even with our speed, the Empire's fleet has the range advantage. They'll tear us apart before we can get within striking distance." Commander Carter's eyes narrowed as he thought. They were in enemy territory, far from any friendly support, with no reinforcements coming. But there was one advantage they still had, something the Empire couldn't match. "We have speed, and we have stealth. We'll use the sector's natural anomalies to mask our movements. We'll approach the flagship through an uncharted gas cloud near the planet's rings. It'll hide us from their sensors long enough for us to close the gap." Reyna was already tapping into the navigational data. "We'll need precise navigation. One wrong turn, and we'll be spotted." "We'll make it work," Carter said. "I'll take the helm myself. Get everything else ready." The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity as the crew scrambled to prepare. The faint hum of the ship's engines became louder, a reminder that they were running out of time. Carter felt the weight of the mission pressing down on him. If they failed, they were finished. The Empire would never forgive them for their defiance. "Steady, everyone," Carter said as he gripped the controls. "We've got one shot at this. If we're going to do it, We do it together." The crew nodded in unison, their expressions set with determination. The bridge was silent except for the steady beeping of the consoles and the low hum of the ship. They were entering the unknown now, preparing for a mission that could either mark their victory or lead them to their doom. As the Vanguard plunged deeper into the gas cloud, the ship began to flicker in and out of visibility on the Empire's wrath unleashed. The explosion rocked the Vanguard, and for a brief moment, the crew thought they might have succeeded. But the truth was much darker. The Empire's response was swift, brutal, and unforgiving. The moment their flagship was hit, the remaining Imperial fleet turned toward them like a swarm of deadly wasps, enraged and seeking retribution. "Shields at 30%. Reyna shouted, her voice laced with panic. She quickly worked her station, trying to maintain their defenses. "We've stirred the hornet's nest now," Lieutenant Yara muttered as she fired off another barrage from the ship's cannons, but their shots seemed insignificant against the sheer power of the Empire's warships. Commander Carter clenched his fists on the controls, feeling the tremors of every impact that struck the hull. "Steady. Don't panic. We've only got one chance to get out of this. Keep firing at their smaller vessels. The flagship is too heavily guarded now." The blast had done some damage. But it wasn't enough to take the Empire's main force out of the equation. The flagship had been crippled, but not destroyed. The Empire's fleet was now fully aware of their presence, and the pursuit was relentless. "Commander, they're closing in," Reyna warned, her voice strained. "We're surrounded." The screens in front of Carter flashed with incoming targets, and the enemy ships moved faster than ever, a menacing ring of firepower that surrounded them. The Empire had sent every available ship to track down the Vanguard, and they wouldn't rest until it was reduced to scrap metal. "We've got to break through," Carter growled. "They can't catch us if they can't see us." "Already working on it," Reyna replied, fingers flying across the console. She activated the ship's cloaking system, but the Vanguard was not made for stealth. It was a warship, not a shadow. Still, they had to try. The gas cloud had worked for a while, but it wouldn't hold the Empire's attention for much longer. In a heartbeat, the ship began to flicker in and out of visibility, like a ghost trying to slip past a nightmare. But it was no easy feat, especially with the Empire's state-of-the-art tracking systems hunting them down. "Incoming fire," Yara shouted as enemy blasts slammed into their shields, causing them to shimmer and crackle. "They're locking onto us. We're losing power fast." "We have to hold them off just a little longer," Carter said, his voice calm but heavy with the weight of responsibility. "Find their weak spots and hit them hard." The crew worked in unison, their minds racing as their fingers flew across the controls. The clock was ticking, and the Empire was closing in. But Carter didn't give up hope. Not yet. They still had the advantage, speed, and the element of surprise. If they could make it to the far side of the system, they could buy themselves a few precious moments to escape the Empire's clutches. "Engage full thrusters," Carter ordered. "Maximum speed." Reyna didn't need further instructions. She thrust the ship forward, and the Vanguard surged ahead, skirting dangerously close to the edge of the gas cloud that had once been their refuge. The sound of the ship's engines echoed through the hull as the ship accelerated, pushing past the enemy fleet with sheer force. The shaking from the blast still reverberated throughout the ship, but the crew held steady, refusing to let fear take hold. The Empire wasn't giving up easily, though. They fired relentlessly, determined to bring down the human ship. A massive Imperial warship fired a laser beam that pierced through space, narrowly missing the Vanguard, but hitting one of the smaller ships tailing them. The explosion was like a signal, the Empire's bloodlust only growing. "They're after us with everything they've got," Yara said, her voice shaky. "We need something big to shake them off." Carter's mind raced. He couldn't let his crew down. He couldn't let the sacrifice of his shipmates and all that they had been through be in vain. His fingers gripped the controls tighter, and he made a snap decision. "We're going straight for their capital ship," he said, his voice low but resolute. "We'll distract them long enough for the others to escape." "You're insane," Yara yelled. "That's suicide. We can't." "There's no choice, Lieutenant," Carter interrupted, turning to her with a hard look. "This is the only chance we've got. Get us in close." With a final, determined push, the Vanguard broke free from the gas cloud, and they shot forward, toward the heart of the Empire's fleet. Their path was now clear, and Carter's plan was simple: draw the enemy's fire and make sure they couldn't follow the others. It was a suicide mission, but one that would give humanity the fighting chance it needed. The lights inside the Vanguard flickered as the ship jolted under enemy fire. They were almost there, just a few seconds away from being in range of the Empire's flagship. It was the only chance they had to make the Empire pay for their arrogance. "Brace for impact," Carter shouted, as the Vanguard plunged into the enemy formation, a deadly force of its own. As the warship closed in on the Empire's capital ship, Carter's heart pounded in his chest. This was their moment. They were going to make the Empire regret underestimating humanity. But just as he thought they might be able to break through, a massive explosion ripped through the darkness. It wasn't from the Vanguard. It was from the Empire's capital ship. The desperate gamble. The violent explosion shook the Vanguard to its core, the hull groaning under the immense pressure. Smoke poured from several breaches, and alarms blared across the ship. The crew struggled to keep their footing as the ship rocked violently from another barrage of fire from the Empire's capital ship. "Status report," Carter barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We've lost 2 primary thrusters," Rena called out from her station, her face pale but focused. "But we're still moving." "Barely." "Shields are at critical," Yara added, her fingers flying over her console in an attempt to stabilize their defense systems. "One more hit like that, and we're done for." Carter's mind raced as the realization hit him. They were pushing their luck, and they couldn't afford to keep gambling with their lives. The Empire was relentless, closing in for the kill. If they didn't act fast, they would never make it out. "Can we get a clean shot at their flagship?" Carter asked, his eyes narrowed as he glanced at Rena. She hesitated, looking at the flashing redouts. "We're too close for our long-range weapons to hit them with any accuracy. We need to get into a better firing position. But that's gonna be tough with the Empire closing in on us." "Then we'll make our own position," Carter said, his tone firm. "Rena, we're going for their engines." "What?" Rena turned to him, disbelief clear on her face. "That's suicidal. Their defense is air." "I know," Carter snapped. "But if we don't take out their engines, they'll be on top of us in seconds. We've only got one shot at this." The plan was reckless, but at this point it was their only option. Taking out the Empire's engines would cripple their pursuit, buying them enough time to escape, or at the very least, to create a diversion. "Set course for the engine bay," Carter ordered. "Full throttle. We need to be right under their belly." Rena hesitated, then nodded grimly. She punched in the commands, and the Vanguard lurched forward, firing its remaining thrusters with all the power it had left. The ship raced toward the Empire's capital ship, now less than a few hundred meters away. The enemy fleet was closing in, but Carter's strategy had one advantage. They wouldn't expect a direct attack from underneath. "Engines at maximum, Captain," Rena shouted. "We're going to hit their flank. They won't even see us coming." The crew braced themselves as the warship hurtled toward its target, the massive Imperial ship looming in front of them. The massive guns of the flagship swiveled, firing in all directions, but most of the blasts went wide. Their attention was focused on other ships, and for a split second, they overlooked the Vanguard's approach. Carter's heart pounded in his chest as the moment of truth arrived. They were less than 100 meters away from the Imperial flagship, and the risk was beyond calculation. Every instinct told him to pull back, but he pushed forward. There was no turning back now. "Target their exhaust vents," Carter ordered. Rena locked onto the heat signatures of the Imperial ship's engines, and with a steady hand, she fired the Vanguard's remaining torpedoes. The torpedoes shot forward, their trails of light briefly illuminating the surrounding space. The crew held their breath as the missiles streaked toward the heart of the enemy's power source. Impact in 5, 4. Yara began, but her voice was drowned out by the deafening roar of the explosion. A massive shockwave rippled through space as the torpedoes struck the Empire's engines. The explosion sent out a violent burst of energy, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The flagship staggered, its engines bursting in flames, and the surrounding Imperial fleet was thrown into disarray. The Empire's most powerful ship was now vulnerable. "We did it," Yara yelled, her eyes wide with shock and triumph. But Carter didn't allow himself to celebrate just yet. The ship was badly damaged, and they still had a fleet of enemies on their tail. The Empire would not let them escape so easily. "Shields are down to 10%, Rena called out, panic creeping into her voice. "They're still coming after us." Carter clenched his fists on the console. He had to think fast. They had just taken down the Empire's flagship, but that was only the first step. The remaining Imperial ships were closing in, ready to finish what the flagship had started. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Carter shouted. "We're not done yet. Keep moving." The Vanguard continued its violent dance with death, dodging incoming fire as it weaved through the chaos. The remaining Imperial ships were slower to react to the loss of their flagship, but that wouldn't last long. The crew was exhausted, their nerves frayed from the constant barrage of fire and the relentless pursuit. But they didn't stop. They couldn't. This fight had become more than just a battle. It was humanity's fight for survival, and they would not go down without a fight. Carter glanced at his crew, their faces grim but determined. They had just done the unthinkable. They had taken down the most advanced ship in the Empire's fleet. But the war was far from over. The tide was turning, and the next battle was already beginning. "Hold on tight," Carter said, his voice cold and steady. "This isn't over yet." With that, the warship surged forward once again, the crew's resolve hardening with every passing second. They would fight until the last breath, until the very end. The last stand. The stars streaked by as the Vanguard shot through the debris field left by the shattered Empire flagship. The crew was battle-worn, each member pushing their limits as the ship raced forward, its engines struggling to maintain speed. The once mighty Empire fleet had been severely crippled by their bold attack, but they were far from defeated. Carter stood at the command console, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge. His eyes scanned the screens, his mind running through 1,000 strategies. The Empire would not let them escape. They had seen too much, and the loss of their flagship would make them even more desperate. "Captain," Rena's voice snapped him out of his thoughts. "We've got incoming. 2 more Imperial warships, closing fast." "How fast?" Carter asked, his voice calm but urgent. "Fast enough to catch us," she replied. "They're using the debris as cover. We won't see them until they're almost on top of us." Carter cursed under his breath. They were too close to make any more drastic maneuvers. Their shields were practically non-existent, and they were running on fumes with no time to repair the damage from the previous battle. "How much longer until we can jump to hyperspace?" Carter asked, glancing at Yara, who had been desperately trying to repair their failing jump drive. "At least 10 minutes if we're lucky," she answered, her voice tight with tension. "We need to buy that time." The Empire was relentless. Carter knew they wouldn't let up until they had wiped out the Vanguard and the human crew aboard it. The odds were stacked against them, but there was no retreat now. He had to do whatever it took to keep the ship alive long enough to make that jump. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Carter ordered. "All crew, get to your battle stations." The warship lurched as it suddenly veered off course, dodging incoming fire from the approaching Imperial ships. The lights flickered, and alarms blared as the ship's hull groaned under the stress. "They've got us pinned, Captain," Yara said, her face grim. "We can't outrun them with our speed compromised." Carter's eyes narrowed as he quickly ran through his options. There was no easy way out of this. They were on the verge of being destroyed, but humanity had never been one to go down without a fight. "Activate the point defense lasers," Carter ordered. "We need to buy more time." Reyna began firing the point defense systems, and beams of energy shot out, vaporizing incoming missiles and enemy fighters. The debris from the shattered flagship created a chaotic field around them, giving the Vanguard some cover, but it wasn't enough to stop the Empire from closing in. "We're down to 20% power, Captain," Reyna shouted. "Our lasers are barely charging. Just hold them off for a few more minutes." Carter snapped, pacing in front of the crew. As if on cue, the first Imperial warship broke through the debris, its massive guns charging up to fire. The enemy ship's energy weapons lit up the dark expanse of space, unleashing a barrage toward the Vanguard. The crew braced for impact, knowing that one hit could be the end. Suddenly, a bright flash erupted as the Vanguard's shields absorbed the blast. The ship staggered, but they had survived the first wave. Carter could hear the cheers of the crew, but he didn't let himself get distracted. "Keep firing. Don't let them get any closer," Carter shouted. Reyna and Yara worked furiously, their hands moving at blinding speeds to keep the ship's weapons running. The point defense lasers flashed, taking out multiple enemy missiles and fighter ships, but it was clear that their time was running out. The second Imperial ship was only moments away from opening fire. Carter's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Yara's voice. "Captain, we're almost there. I've stabilized the hyperdrive just enough. We can jump in 5 minutes." The news sent a jolt of hope through Carter's chest, but it was a fleeting moment. The second Imperial warship fired, and this time, the Vanguard couldn't evade. The blast struck the lower hull, sending a shockwave through the ship. The crew screamed as the ship shuddered violently, alarms blaring again. The lights flickered, and some of the consoles sparked. But Carter stood firm, his expression unshaken. "Status report," he barked. "We've lost the lower hull sections." Reyna shouted. "The port side is exposed. We've got fires on board, and the oxygen supply is. Get it under control," Carter ordered, cutting her off. "We're not dying here today." The crew scrambled to put out the fires, sealing off damaged compartments, but there was no time to fix everything. Carter turned to Yara. "How long until we can jump?" 2 minutes, Yara replied through gritted teeth. Carter nodded. They had to hold on for 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes, and they would escape the grasp of the Empire. The Vanguard shuddered again as more enemy fire hit. The shields were gone, and the hull was starting to crack under the pressure. But Carter refused to let them fall. They were too close. "Prepare for hyperspace jump," Carter said, his voice steely. "Now or never." The crew was battered, bruised, and running on pure adrenaline, but they moved with precision. As the final barrage of enemy fire streaked toward them, Carter braced himself, holding onto the command console. The ship lurched again, this time more violently than ever. And then, silence. With a sudden jolt, the stars around the Vanguard stretched and warped. The familiar feeling of hyperspace enveloped them as they jumped to safety, leaving the Imperial fleet behind. For a moment, the crew sat in stunned silence, breathing heavily. They had done the impossible. They had escaped. But Carter knew this wasn't over. The Empire would not stop. They had only just begun to fight, and he would lead them to victory. The war that will change everything. The Vanguard had escaped the grasp of the Imperial fleet, but the victory was bittersweet. The crew was battered, their ship heavily damaged, and they had no way of knowing how long they could continue to run from the Empire. As they drifted through the unknown reaches of space, a sense of dread hung in the air. Carter stood on the bridge, staring out into the cold, starry void. The quiet after the battle was deafening. His fingers tapped the edge of the command console, thoughts racing. They had won this battle. But the war was far from over. "Captain, we're in the safe zone." Reyna's voice cut through his thoughts. "The Empire won't be able to track us here, but they'll be looking for us soon." Carter nodded, not looking at her. "I know. We need to keep moving." "We need to regroup first, Captain," Reyna continued. "We've lost a lot of crew, and the ship's integrity is compromised. We need repairs, and the men and women on board need rest." The tone in her voice was soft but firm, a reminder of the heavy burden Carter carried. He wasn't just a captain. He was a leader to these people, and their survival rested on his decisions. "I'll make sure they get what they need," Carter replied. "But we don't have time to rest. The Empire's going to come after us with everything they've got. We need to prepare for what's coming." Reyna didn't argue. She knew he was right. The fight had only just begun. In the war room, Yara worked tirelessly to assess the damage to the Vanguard. Sparks flew from the walls as the engineers tried to stabilize the power systems. The ship was a patchwork of makeshift repairs, and they were running out of time before they would be forced to fight again. Yara approached Carter with a grim expression. "We've patched up what we can, but the hull is too damaged. We need more supplies and resources if we want to keep going. The Empire has resources beyond anything we can match." Carter looked at her for a long moment. "What's our best chance?" Yara hesitated, her fingers dancing across the console as she calculated their options. "There's an outpost in the next system. It's neutral territory. If we can reach it, we might be able to resupply and fix the ship. But we'll need to move quickly." "Then we'll move quickly," Carter said, his voice resolute. "Set a course. We're not waiting around for the Empire to catch up with us." As the ship's engines hummed to life, the crew rallied together. It was clear to everyone that the battle ahead would be unlike anything they had faced before. The Empire had been wounded, but it was far from finished. The last battle was just the beginning of an even greater war. They had defied the odds once, but now Carter and his crew had to do it again. Humanity had proven that they could stand up to the most powerful forces in the galaxy, but the question remained: would they be able to keep their momentum, or would they be crushed by the unstoppable force that was the Galactic Empire? The galaxy was on the brink, and only one thing was certain: humans had changed the rules of the game. But now they had to live with the consequences. In the deep silence of space, the Vanguard sailed forward. The crew had no illusions. This was not just a war for survival anymore. This was a war for freedom, for hope, and for everything they had fought for. And they were ready. With every passing moment, the stakes grew higher, the tension thicker. They had escaped death, but the price for peace would be much steeper. The journey ahead would not be easy, and the road to victory would be paved with hardship, sacrifice, and pain. But as long as they had the will to fight, they would stand tall, against the Empire, against the odds, and against fate itself. The war had only just begun, and humanity was ready to make its mark.